Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. So, today we will start with a new chapter of Bhagavad-gita, chapter 6, which is titled Dhyana Yoga. So, we'll begin with a little bit of background, how it relates to the previous chapter. So, a quick summary of the fifth chapter, that in response to Arjun's question, Krishna explains that Nishkam Karma and Jnana are equal, but to work in devotion is simpler. And then Krishna explains how to perform Nishkam Karma. So, chapter 3 and 5, they're both about Nishkam Karma. The focus is a little bit different. That in third, the focus of Nishkam Karma is detachment. And in fifth, the focus of Nishkam Karma is attachment. So third talks about material detachment, and the fifth chapter talks about spiritual attachment. And in order to promote this material detachment that will ultimately mature into spiritual attachment, Krishna talks about the three doers. He talks about the jiva, the modes of material nature, and Paramatma. And then he focuses on the Paramatma, the super soul, as a way to develop spiritual attachment. So that's the segue to the sixth chapter. Now, quick overview of the sixth chapter. It has 47 verses, one of the longer chapters, actually the fourth longest chapter in Bhagavad-gita. And the first four verses talk about how Astanga Yoga requires detachment. So this is setting up the prerequisite. Then Krishna talks about the Yoga Rudha, or the advanced stage of Astanga Yoga, in a way of setting up the goal for it. Then 10 to 32, Krishna talks about the lower stages of the yoga, and he talks about the results also of one who gives up yoga at the initial stages as opposed to the more advanced stages. So when one Krishna is talking about giving up, then the question comes that why does one give up? What are the impediments? So then Krishna talks about the main impediment, which is the mind. 37 to 45 talks about, Arjuna asks a question about what's the destination of one who gives up, and Krishna talks about the two different destinations. And finally, there is the summary, which is the glories of Astanga Yoga. So I also wanted to speak a little bit about Astanga Yoga. It does not Krishna does not explicitly speak about Astanga Yoga or the stages of it. He speaks more about conceptually taking into Astanga Yoga. So Astanga Yoga is expanded in Patanjali Sutras, and Ashta means 8. So as we saw that Astanga Yoga requires the senses to be controlled, and purity of heart and desires. So that's why Karma and Jnana Yoga are considered to be prerequisites of Astanga Yoga. So it's an eightfold process, and one goes stage by stage. One can't really go to the higher stages. And this is an important consideration that Srila Prabhupada often brings forth to criticize the so-called followers of Astanga Yoga, who tend to jump to the higher stages. So the first stage is Yam, which is following of the moral codes. So Yam translates to is prohibitions, the don'ts, that don't engage in violence, sex, sinful activities. The Niyams is the do's, and the do's are like cleanliness, austerity, contentment. So between the Yam and the Niyam, one avoids the don'ts and follows the do's. once one has become adept at this, and now we see the reason why karma and gyan is a prerequisite, because essentially the practitioner of karma and gyan, they have now become adept at following the do's and the don'ts, the Vedic prescriptions. So if one simply takes to some form of yoga without going through the yam and niyam, then it's not possible to stay engaged in the yoga or to get any benefit out of it. So the third stage is asana. Asana essentially means sitting still. And this is what is also known as Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga results in good health and longevity. So we see a lot of people practicing asanas, not for any spiritual benefit, but only for health benefits. But even that can only be followed once the yams and niyams are followed. Like one cannot be taking intoxication and eating meat and illicit sex and then performing asanas and expecting to get any benefit out of it. So why is asana one of the angas of Ashtanga Yoga? Because the process of Ashtanga Yoga takes a very long time. So this is a preparatory step that you would need a long life in order to make any real advancements in Ashtanga Yoga. You would need to be able to not worry about your health. So you should be able to sit for a long time, to be immune to the bodily needs. All these are simply preparatory items which are achieved through asana. Pranayam, pran is life airs and pranayam is breathing exercises. So they also help in improving one's longevity, and they also help in controlling the mind. The life airs essentially are flowing all over the body. The soul is floating on the life airs. So the first four steps, yam, niyam, asana, pranayam, are essentially preparatory steps. And as you can see that in all these four steps, the practitioner continues to perform activities. So one who simply takes to Ashtanga Yoga giving up all activities essentially is circumventing the first four steps. And because this is a sequential process, one can never actually achieve the desired goals. Pratyahara is, ahar means food, and pratyahar means that changing the source of your food. And contextually what it means is that one changes the focus of one's mind. Where does the mind get sustenance from? So typically it is getting sustenance from the sense object. In Pratyahara, the practitioner now changes that source of nourishment to the mind. So instead of the sense object, one now begins to focus on one's internal aspects. So this is the so-called, this is the transition stage, where one is now going from external to internal. And the last three are essentially the same with increasing level of concentration. So dharana, dhyana and samadhi, they're all meditation. This is what actually is the goal of Ashtanga Yoga. The first four steps is preparatory, the fifth is orienting oneself towards one's internal, and the sixth, seventh and eighth is essentially where a mature yogi will spend most of his lifetime or several lifetimes, right? So dharana means ekagra chitta, or concentrating one's mind. So dharana is the stage where the yogi established an object to concentrate on. So it's not necessary for all the Ashtanga yogis to only focus on the Paramatma or the Brahman. There are in the Satyug, because the process for yoga, the Ashtanga yogis would focus on Krishna, on the personal form of Krishna. Dhruva Maharaj is an example of it, that he was in the Satyug. So Narad Muni gave him the process of performing Ashtanga Yoga. And you can see that he was following He was following pranayam, he was doing, reducing his eating, etc. But then what was he focusing on? He was focusing on the four-armed form of Lord Vishnu. Now there are some yogis who will focus on the impersonal Brahman, and there are some yogis that will focus on the Paramatma within. Right? So this is where the yogi establishes the object of their meditation. In Dhyana, they then actually begin to meditate. And in Samadhi, that meditation is complete. So one's mind does not flicker. So these are essentially the 8 stages of Astanga Yoga. So one thing that we will see is that for the most part, Srila Prabhupada in the purports will either deprecate Astanga Yoga, saying that it is impractical, untenable, or he would outright say that reject it. Right? So the question is that when the Acharya is speaking in this way, then why is this chapter there? Right? So for that, I think it's important to understand the mood of Srila Prabhupada in the current age, and also the mood of Krishna. So Krishna speaks about Astanga Yoga because it's a bona fide process of self-realization. In the Satyog, Treta Yoga, that was the way. Kritya Dhyayate Vishnu. In Satyog, Dhyayate Vishnu. Dhyan was the way. So for the sake of completeness, Krishna speaks about Astanga Yoga. Now he also speaks about it to show the difficulty of this path. So we'll see later on in the chapter, when Krishna is speaking about Astanga Yoga, Arjun himself, he objects to it, saying this path is untenable, it's difficult. So when Arjun, who was such a great personality, Dwapar Yoga, he's talking about the difficulty to follow this path, how much more so for us. So in a way, Krishna speaks this to discourage us to take to Astanga Yoga. Because there is a lot of superficial attractiveness of the process. The whole notion of a person sitting immobile with long hair and beard and eyes half closed, body emaciated, it basically evokes the sense of spiritual grandeur, and people take to it thinking that they will reach that stage. But it's a very difficult, very, very difficult process. We see in the lives of great yogis like Vishwamitra and Kardam Muni. Kardam Muni didn't have a fall down, but yet he knew that his process of Astanga Yoga did not completely purify his desires for entering Grahastha life. So when one sees the difficulty of the path, then one looks for a path that is equally effective but easier. For those who still want to do Astanga Yoga, Krishna puts it over here to show that it is still dependent on karma and jnana. Right? So one should not jump to Astanga Yoga. And that is one of the criticisms that Srila Prabhupada consistently speaks about and writes, is the so-called yoga studios or yoga teachers. Now there is no harm in practicing yoga for improving one's health. But then one should not confuse it. One should not say that this is spiritual advancement. Right? So it's like you know that you're using it for material advancement, and you get the results that you want. What Prabhupada criticizes when the yoga teachers would conflate things like, by performing this yoga, you'll become spiritually elevated, you'll develop mystic powers. That is cheating religion, right? And then Krishna also talks about the position of failed yogis, in a way to talk about his mercy. That even though one takes to this difficult path and fails, but my mercy is still there. I still help the person. And then sometimes you will see that even devotees, they practice yoga as a supplement to bhakti. So through the practice of yoga, one is able to gradually develop control on the mind, to control the breathing. So, and then they use this to chant better rounds, to perform better quality deity worship. So they don't use it as a primary anga, but as a supporting anga. So we now start with the first chapter, with the first verse of the sixth chapter. 6.1 Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Anashatah Karma Phalam Karyam Karma Karoti Yaha Sasannasi Cha Yogi Cha Naniragnir Na Chakriyaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as is obligated is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. So, the first two verses of the sixth chapter are essentially an introduction to the process of yoga. So, you notice that Krishna here is essentially talking about Nishkam karma. And the reason Krishna talks about Nishkam karma is that the results of Nishkam karma are the prerequisites for making progress in Astanga yoga. So this is actually, if you're keeping count, this is the fifth time in the Bhagavad-gita so far that Krishna talks about Nishkam karma, beginning from the second chapter. And the reason he talks, so there are 5 reasons why he talks about Nishkam karma as a prerequisite to Astanga yoga. One is that it is not possible to perform Astanga yoga if the senses are still attached. And that sense detachment is obtained through the performance of Nishkam karma. Second is that it protects against fall down. So this talks about the control of the mind. So Nishkam karma gives you both control of the senses as well as the mind. Right? So remember the third chapter Krishna talks about Falgu Vairagya, where one is sitting with the senses disengaged but with the mind engaged. Right? He says this is Falgu because eventually such a person will fall down. But by the practice of Nishkam karma, one is also able to develop internal detachment. Then the first 4 stages of Astanga yoga. So we saw the first 4 stages talked about Yama, Niyam, Asan and Pranayam. They're still, they require activities to be done with detachment. Only in the last 3 stages of meditation that one actually gives up activities. So in order to make advancement in Astanga yoga, one still needs to perform activities during the initial 4 stages. And that needs to be done in a Nishkam manner. Then the fourth is that by the practice of Nishkam karma, one gets the true conception of the self, Atmagya. And the fifth is that by further practice of Nishkam karma, one gets Paramatma Gyan. One gets the understanding of the goal. So when we reach the stage of Pratyahara in Astanga yoga, then one needs to establish one's conception. That who am I going to meditate on? And for that purpose, one already needs to have an understanding of the spiritual aspect of one's existence. That I am a soul, not the body, and this is the Lord. Paramatma or Brahman or Krishna, and this is what I can focus on. So if one was to simply sit down and do Astanga Yoga, what will they meditate on? So a lot of these so-called yoga schools, they will say you meditate on nothing. Meditate on the sound of one hand clapping, or meditate on between your forehead, right? So these are all just gimmicks. They don't mean anything. One may self-delude oneself saying that I'm meditating on nothing and nothing is going on, but they're neither sustainable nor do they give any results because they're not supported by the scriptures. So because when one is making real progress in yoga, one needs to have a clear spiritual conception, which can only be developed by the systematic practice of karma and jnana. So that's why Krishna is cautioning over here that one should not suddenly give up the practice of nishkam karma. So what should he do? So Krishna says that karyam karma. So karyam karma is your prescribed duties. These things like the sandhya vandanam, taking bath, giving in charity. So whatever is your prescribed duties by the scriptures, you should do it. How should you do it? Anashrita karma phalam. So anashrita ashrit means taking shelter. Anashrita means without taking shelter of the fruits of the activities, or essentially being detached. And Krishna says this is a yogi because he is internally detached. Right? So essentially these verses are summarizing the whole notion of nishkam karma that Krishna has developed in the 3rd, 4th and 5th chapters. So Srila Prabhupada writes that the sannyasis sometimes artificially think they have become liberated from all material duties, and therefore they cease to perform the Agnihotra Yagyas, fire sacrifices, but actually they are self-interested because their goal is to become one with impersonal Brahman. Such a desire is greater than any material desire, but it is not without self-interest. So Srila Prabhupada talks about someone who is even more advanced, that a person who is aspiring to perform Astanga Yoga to merge into the impersonal Brahman. So he says that this is greater than a material desire because the goal is non-material. It's spiritual, but there is still self-interest because the person is looking to improve one's own situation. That once I become part of the impersonal Brahman, Om Shanti Shanti, there will be no troubles for me. So the focus is still me. And then Prabhupada compares this with a devotee, that a person acting in Krishna consciousness works for the satisfaction of the whole without self-interest. A Krishna conscious person has no desire for self-satisfaction. His criteria for success is satisfaction of Krishna. And thus, he is a perfect sannyasi or perfect yogi. So this is a theme that Srila Prabhupada will follow throughout the chapter, that whatever advancements that one can aspire to get through Astanga Yoga, they're already contained within the practice of Bhakti Yoga. So Prabhupada essentially is taking the mood of Krishna and being more explicit about it. Initially we discussed that Krishna speaks about Astanga Yoga actually to discourage us, that this is difficult, requires a long time and the great chance for fall down, and Krishna takes that mood and brings it more in the forefront explicitly by making these comparisons. And like I said, we will see this on an ongoing way. Okay, let's move on to the second verse. Okay, verse 2. Yam sanyasamiti prahur yogam tam vidi pandava nahaya sanyasat sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. What is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. O son of Pandu, For one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So Krishna here is emphasizing the need for one having successfully performed karma yoga, nishkam karma, before one can perform astang yoga. And actually he goes one step beyond, and so the point that he makes is that one who has not renounced the desires to enjoy the fruits of the action, so sanyasta sankalpa, he cannot be either a Gyan yogi or an Astang yogi. Right? So unless one performs Nishkam karma, one cannot be either a Gyan yogi or Astang yogi. Now, one who has performed Nishkam can be either. He can be performing Gyan yoga or Astang yoga. And then what he does is that he combines all three of them on a platform of equivalency. Right? He says that that because there is similarity of Nishkam, of giving up desires in Gyan, and similarly in Astang yoga, one is stopping one's internal functions in the form of enjoyment, in the form of the thirst of enjoyment. Both these terms are also applicable to one who is performing Nishkam karma. Right? So the similarity is in detachment. That whether one is performing Nishkam karma, Gyan or Astang, the common thread is detachment. So because of this similarity of the qualities, Krishna is equating them, and then at the same time he is also emphasizing that the prerequisite should be followed. Prabhupada extends this to one step further, saying that in bhakti, this nishkam is automatically attained by Krishna Kam, because that Kam gets directed towards Krishna, so one becomes automatically detached. Okay, next verse 3. Okay, verse 3. Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanam uchyate yoga rudhasya tasseva shama karanam uchyate. For one who is a neophyte in the Eightfold Yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. So in the previous, in the introduction of the chapter, we had talked about the 8 stages and how the initial 4 stages are preparatory and the final 3 stages are the more mature stage. So in the previous verse, Krishna had talked about how one still needs to perform activity in the initial stages of yoga. So Arjun may ask this question that is this perpetual, that one will continue to perform activities throughout the stages of yoga. So now in this verse, Krishna is setting a limit to what can one attain through the practice of karma, which is interesting because so far Krishna was emphasizing over and over again the importance of karma, especially nishkam karma, but now he's setting a limit. So he's saying that for one who is a neophyte, and what is a neophyte? So yoga rurukshor. So arukshor is one who is a neophyte. Neophyte means that the person is still somewhere in the first 4 stages of yam, niyam, asan, pranayam, pratyahara. Pratyahara is, I guess, a transition, but somewhere in the first 4 stages, he is a neophyte. For them, karma is the means, because they need to develop the detachment while they're preparing to make advancement. But for one who already has achieved the stage of external and internal detachment, then the person does not need to perform karma. So that's why Krishna says that cessation of all material activities is said to be the means, because such a person is now fully occupied in the exclusive stages of astang that lead to samadhi. Okay, next verse. Verse 4. Yada hi nendriyartheshu na karmasvanusajjate sarva sankalpa sannyasi yoga rudastadochyate. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for self-gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So this verse talks about an yogi who is advanced. I previously talked about the yoga ruruksha, the one who is a neophyte. This talks about the yoga rudhas. So when a person is elevated in yoga, because he has already gone through the purificatory process of karma and jnana, so Krishna says, having renounced all material desires. So he has already renounced both internal and external attachment to activities. So he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. And what is the reason for that? That he is enjoying within. So because he is drawing sustenance by the bliss of the self-realization. Right? So he has completely given up the desire. So sankalpa. Sankalpa is one's obsession. So he has given up the desire for sense objects and the actions to attain them. Right? So he is now at the stage of yoga rudha. Now it's also important to note that such a person has given up activities in a mode of neutrality, not out of aversion. Right? So this is relevant from Arjun's perspective, because he wanted to go to the forest and perform meditation because of his aversion to being engaged in the battle, which was his duty. But at this stage, a mature yogi, he gives it up because he does not see any use of it. Not because he dislikes it, not because he has developed an aversion to it. So such a person may choose to perform activities if it is needed. So whether he performs or not performs is the same because of his mood of detachment. Okay, so we'll end over here, and we will then start with the next section of the chapter that talks about the position of an advanced yogi. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.